So hi everyone, I'm here with Adi Fatukasi and Selom Mortty, both from from Sarah, and you're like an AI collections kind of startup, really. Obviously in the collections space. So both of you, welcome. Really much appreciate you joining me.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having us.
So this kind of space is sort of exploding, and certainly we spent a little bit of time together, sort of like looking at the product and those kind of things. I mean, where do you think the state of evolution of it is, and I suppose how much opportunity do you think there is around sort of like bringing AI to the collections kind of world?
So I think if you look at the evolution of AI, it's very much gone and exploded over the last couple of years since the sort of invention of the models, the model companies coming out with ever improving AI technology. If you look at where we started, certainly when I started 6-7 years ago, looking into the space, it was very much chatbot driven, very much early ML, very simple versions of AI. Now we're going into conversational AI, we're going into decisioning AI. It's really taken off, and I think the state of evolution now is fully agentic. It's the idea that AI can do everything that a human can do, and maybe even better, and that's a scary proposition for a lot of people, but I think it's also an interesting one for the future about what it looks like for industry.
And one of the things I find kind of interesting is, often these new technologies come along and they tend to be sort of automating things we know already, right? So it might be like let's take the email, let's say automated telephone calls or those kind of things. It's trying to replacing one thing with a direct replacement. Where do you think we're going to get to in terms of like rethinking the whole thing? I mean, do you think there's have we really sort of scratched the surface yet? Kind of feels like we haven't yet in terms of like redesigning complete processes.
No. Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. I think rather than looking at it from a perspective of automation, it's understanding that now it's an agentic AI system that people are looking at, and that's something that learns. So it's actually understanding how best to contact people, when best to contact people, likelihood of payments, really analyzing those calls, for example, and seeing if people are compliant, if they're not compliant. And I think that's where it kind of can augment and create efficiencies within the industry rather than just automating systems.
And what's the game changer, particularly with AI, that's sort of changing our ability to be able to do it? Because we've had automation, for example, for a while. We've had RPA for a while. What's the extra capability that particularly AI, and I think we were talking about generative AI and LLMs, that kind of gives us in the collection space?
I think it's again, following up from Selom, it's about that first principles thinking. I think you can reinvent whole industries because humans are going to be the sort of limiting factor in a sense. I think AI is now believable, and I think that is what has changed, and that's what we're seeing across the board. And it's becoming even more believable every day. If you look at some of the voice models a couple of years ago, for example, when we were experimenting with early voice models, they were terrible. They weren't believable. No one bought into that. But if you look at them today, you could believe most normal people could not distinguish between an AI voice, conversational voice, and a human voice. And I think it's that element of believability that's really gonna drive this adoption and machine training.
And what's your view on, I suppose, from a consumer point of view? I mean, in terms of like being transparent, that is AI versus being transparent, maybe saying, well, look, this is believable, so we don't necessarily have to say anything. I mean, what's your kind of view on that in terms of like, where do you think that sits, and where do you think it should sit, and what do you think it'll be going forward?
Yeah, I think the better that the AI is getting, and I say the better, the scarier that it's getting and how believable it sounds, I think the more there's a kind of stress on the importance of actually revealing that it is AI, right? So I don't think it's right to call someone with AI and just get straight into the conversation without them knowing. So I think it's important to mention that. What we find is that it really does depend on the situation. So people who are, for example, have always intended to pay, haven't been able to pay at the right time. If you catch them at the right time, they don't care if they're speaking to AI or a real person. They just want to get that payment sent across, right? Someone who's a bit more hostile might use the fact that it's AI as an excuse to not want to interact with them. But realistically, they didn't want to interact with anyone in the first place. So I think it's really dependent on the actual situation.
I mean, it does feel like that attitudes are kind of changing. I mean, even attitudes around AI seem to be changing. I mean, like even if you go back in history, I mean, like about 6 months ago, within the AI history, it seems to be, then there was quite a lot of sort of we were very reticent around using AI. There's a lot of discussion around hallucinations, a lot of discussions around whether it should be adopted, those kind of things. And it feels like that sort of quietened down a bit, and it's sort of as we got more used to it. I mean, is that kind of the sense you get? I mean, because you're obviously out there, you know with a product talking about almost like 100% kind of AI. Are you finding that the attitudes are kind of changing in terms of like interacting with AI?
For sure. People that when we were speaking to last year were very skeptical, all of a sudden banging on our doors asking like, how do we do this? I think that it's shifted from um, I'm reluctant to use AI to how do we implement it, and I think that's the sort of next stage. It's well, all well and good. You want the AI and you want it to have all these great magical effects. I think people are seeing it as some sort of magic stick. But I think the major thing we're seeing now is about implementation. How do you deploy it safely? How do you put guardrails in place? And also an element of training. How do you implement it in a workforce that's scared that it will replace them? And it's an educational piece that we're having to do all the time. And that's where we're seeing most of our efforts being put into.
And in terms of like targets for implementation, I mean, how are you sort of like getting people used to the fact that this can be implemented or from a use case point of view, but also like where to start? Because I know you've got quite an expansive vision in terms of like what this will look like. I mean, really pretty much end to end. But I mean, is there a place where people should kind of start to go into that? Because sometimes the step to go from one to sort of like the future is so big that people are saying, well, hang on, I need to think about that. But if I can just make incremental steps, and that can sort of like help us get used to it. I mean, what do you think the best path is for that?
I think, as you mentioned, incremental steps is really important, especially if someone hasn't adopted AI already into their workflow. But I think you need to remember that everyone nowadays in their personal life or their work life uses AI in some capacity. And I think that plays a part as to why people are a bit more receptive towards it. So I think people have a higher understanding of the simple parts of AI than we give them credit for. And I think if you design your AI to be really easy to use, just be a few clicks of a button, the implementation isn't actually too hard. You just have to kind of educate them on what you can actually do and how far you can push it. It starts off with, can we adopt this? And it ends up in curiosity and let's see how far we can actually push this and how much it can actually do for us.
There does seem to be a bit of a gap between what people talk about at work around using AI and then what people are doing at home, right? Because I mean, when you actually talk to people, sort of, around a dinner table, or if you're out, going for coffee with someone, then like you do actually find when you probe, like most people are using it quite a bit, more than you kind of think. I mean, that's kind of my impression, at least, anyway.
Yeah, definitely, most definitely.
Yeah, most definitely.
And I think people have almost personified it more now. It's almost like a person or someone who they can work alongside, which is why Adi and I really like the idea of it being an employee rather than a software. It's almost something that you can work alongside that helps you out rather than just a software that you can kind of tap into.
And do you think that's a good use case to kind of start in terms of like having it almost like as an employee that works alongside, or it can provide augmented intelligence, I suppose, or augmented sort of workflows to employees? I mean, are you sort of seeing that? Is that what people are looking at? Or do you sort of see it more as, let's have it as an employee that will do certain case types, as an example?
I think it's that both. I think it's that malleability. It's that ability to plug those kind of agentic AI tools into wherever you see fit. Some people want it to be their compliance officer. Some people want it to be their outreach engine. Some people want it to take it end to end. Some people just want it to manage it and audit payments. The beauty of it is that it can really go into whatever sort of workflow you're looking at, and really sort of help you to optimize that. That's where we're seeing the use case. We have some people that are using it just for outreach. We have some people that are using it for audit. Depends on how they want to use it.
Yeah, and what about quality management? So obviously, quality management, treatment, customer treatment, good customer outcomes are like critically important, particularly in the UK where we're all based. I mean, how is it best to sort of monitor the quality? What's your sort of advice really around that when implementing these sort of like advanced systems when you put them in?
Yeah, and that's where we see AI being super powerful. We see it as kind of a superpower in that aspect of things, where human mistakes can be made we think AI through analysis is able to actually pick up on those things. So, for example, on a phone call right now, you can look at over 100 different data points to understand what's gone on in that phone call, if you're compliant, if you've been able to pick up a vulnerability, and it can flag that. So we think where humans might actually make those mistakes, AI could actually be a bit more touch tight with that and actually understand how to improve. And that could be analyzing manual calls, that could be analyzing manual interactions, or it could be analyzing itself as well. So AI kind of is at a point now where it's super compliant and can be built to be as adjacent to any rules that you want it to learn.
And you must get asked questions around things like reporting and evidencing and those kind of things. And I suppose that kind of helps with that, the fact that it's done within the system rather than sort of done manually, I suppose, to a certain extent.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
That. It's a very important part of credit and collections in general, is keeping that log of anything that happens.
And so do you think we're going to get in the position where we have AI monitoring agents? I mean, feels like that's kind of where we're going, or at least anyway.
So I'm me and Sel, I'm the AI optimist. I think we're already seeing it in payments, right? People are creating payment rails and email rails for agent-to-agent communication. We will get to a point, I think, very distant, maybe not in credit collections. I think this will probably be one of the last industries where you will have an element of AI monitoring AI, but you'll always have a human, I think, in a very sensitive industry like finance. You will have humans monitoring AI, but you may have layers of AI in between monitoring each other, but a human makes the final say, I think, at every point. That's our belief.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that's kind of interesting is almost like, I was going to write a piece on this already around the API economy that's kind of generated, this sort of developing as well, which is, computers talking to computers, and there's this whole world of sort of API services that's sitting underneath. And I imagine you guys use a lot of APIs as well. And that's computers talking with computers all the time. And it feels like that's sort of starting to build as well. And a lot of that's kind of hidden, even in terms of like API payment services, API hotel booking services, API purchasing services. I mean, all of those sort of things feel like that's a new area that is probably not as consumer visible, but it feels like that's going to start to build. So we can sort of build these AI and integrate them, AI systems, and integrate them much more into our processes. I don't know what your kind of view is on that.
We see it all the time. So the ability. I was using a tool yesterday that gave me the ability to book a hotel just from ChatGPT directly. That is a level of API to API natural language that I think a lot of people are using AI have not even scratched the surface. They're just typing in stuff into ChatGPT and they're saying that's AI. In the future, you'll just have AI doing payments. You'll have AI trading companies. It's really interesting to see what will happen. In the future, we envision a world in which you want a debt chase, you type into ChatGPT and it starts that workflow for you. That's where we see the future of the industry going.
Well, the hotel one was kind of interesting because I was using, we don't know, we were chatting, we were talking about OpenClaw and like looking at that to like scrape like hotel rooms, and it was kind of interesting in terms of like what was available and not, and you could see that some of the change had clearly sort of gone through this. I want to restrict the use of bots to be able to like give pricing or to be able to access data, and yet I kind of want to do that so I can book things automatically. And there's a battle, it felt like, between the two, between automated interaction and API, which would be great. But then there's also, I suppose, restrictions around, well, I want to force people to go and actually look at their account. I want to force people to the website. And it feels like that's a conundrum that's sort of not really resolved yet because, yeah, we want real people to go, but there's also going to be this new world where we want computers to go because they're acting on behalf of real consumers as well.
Yeah. I think the future is, as I said, I think we're like 4 or 5 years away from like full natural language. You being able to say something, and it just doing it for you. Send £25 to someone's account, and it will happen.
Now, complaints is one of the areas which has sort of started to come up in terms of like people using AI as an example around generating complaints and being able to fire those off, and particularly being able to fire those off en masse as well. So I could complain to every single company I ever do business with, probably at a push of a button, and I could probably quote correct legal phrases. For each of the complaints I could generate huge amounts of data. And that's become a bit of a problem in collections, I suppose, because the only way to respond to those is basically by using AI to process them, right? So to be able to come back and process them. So you almost get in this condition where you get human gets out of the loop, whereas you actually almost like need to force people in to actually talk to people. So I'm sort of arguing against what I said before. How much do we need to design that in terms of like process design to decide, well, when do we actually need to talk to someone versus when do we want it to be AI capable or API capable versus actually forcing to talk with people? And like, how do we best think about sort of designing that into processes?
Yeah, that's really important. As you mentioned, it's something you see in collections a lot now. It's you getting stuck into a loop of AI talking to AI, and it's just back and forth that goes on and on. I think right now, I'm not sure if you've seen, you're able to actually understand whether something is AI by putting it through an AI analysis, right? And I think what would be super important is to have kind of a branch off a workflow to say, look, if it's an AI response, human in the loop, try and get hold of the actual person or the actual person who's typing everything into the AI itself. I think the system needs to understand whether it's speaking to AI, but make sure not to get stuck in that loop and bring a human into the loop and see where they can intervene. Essentially.
Yeah.
And do you think, and that can be built in within I suppose the strategy, I suppose, to be able to do that?
Yeah, exactly.
Because sometimes it's worth almost like breaking the loop around AI to AI conversation to say, because if you picked up the phone and actually spoke with them, they'd say, oh yeah, I know, I wrote that because I needed to get something off my desk.
Exactly.
And actually what I wanted to do is just have a human contact. So look, I'm in trouble. I just need I need a bit of help, right? So rather than it being sort of like this escalating situation of like legalese, I suppose, to a certain extent.
Yeah. I think it's that awareness of your AI that you've built to know it's speaking to AI and to know that that might not be the best way to deal with the situation is to respond with an AI response, and that's when it triggers that human in the loop.
Yeah, and in terms of like markets or market segments to look after, I mean, or to look at, I mean, which markets or industries and companies within industries, I suppose, do you think are places where you think going to start to see this coming in first? I mean, do you get better responses from certain sort of verticals or segments of the industries versus others in terms of adoption?
So for us, it's quite broad, but I would say where you're seeing the most kind of interest is from people that are having lots of collections to do. So debt purchasing, for example, where they need to service portfolios. Traditionally, you'd put out a master service agreement or an RFP for several debt collection agencies or services to do it. There is, especially for the American clients we talk to, there is more of an understanding of them wanting to build or buy technology in-house that will allow them to service hundreds of thousands of cases at once. You're seeing it in particular verticals like construction, who are reluctant, big construction companies, they're very reluctant to go out to debt collection agencies because of relationships and vice versa. Look at freelancers, you don't want to damage relationships. They want to own that life cycle, that credit collections life cycle themselves. So the ability for them to hire a collections employee or someone that can sit along their team as an AR executive, a collections agent, is very appealing to that kind of individual who can design the agent in their own tone, in their own rules, with their own sort of customer language. I think that's a very attractive proposition for first-party companies, certainly.
And where's I suppose looking at different markets and different kind of verticals. I mean, there's a lot of focus often placed around cost, and this is going to save me money. And where's the balance of that versus it's going to give me extra capability, which is what you've just also talked about, which is I'm going to make extra calls that I couldn't make before. I can call people earlier, and a lot of the conversations. So in the last couple of years have been like, well, this is going to save costs, or this is going to get rid of people in the process. I can automate more, versus this actually allows me to call earlier. This actually allows me to make internal calls rather than outsourcing, those kind of things. Are you seeing that balance change or subtly changing over time? Because it feels like we've gone from one and we're moving to the latter.
Yeah, we definitely see that balance change. We see, well, I think initially with AI, it's I can do this a lot cheaper, or I could do this with less people. I think now we're getting to a point, as Ade mentioned earlier, that the AI is getting to a point where it's so technical and it's so good at what it does. You're actually adding value as well as cutting on costs. I think part of that is not being so arrogant to think that your AI can do every single thing in the world, and understanding where improvements need to be made. And that's why the technology is where it's at right now.
Yeah.
I mean, I was watching a piece just looking around, like those funding cycles, particularly for AI, and so we've gone through, definitely just like the dot-com bubble, we've gone through a bit of a, feels like we're going through a bit of a hype cycle, I suppose, in terms of from that point of view, and sort of like, and it'll come down a little bit. I mean, but it does feel like we're sort of coming down a little bit in terms of like the hype around it, and we're getting into the sort of like real use cases. But where do you think investors in particular are sort of like looking at it in terms of, is it the growth piece, is it the adding capability, or is it the cost piece? I mean, what do you think? Where do you think the investment kind of cycle kind of sits on it? What's their view on it? I mean, obviously it's around return, isn't it?
Yeah, ultimately it's return, but it's funny because the investment, if you if you look at how it started, it was more around the cheaper costs and the ability to 10x, what a human capability can do. If you actually look at the Magic Beans or the Sequoias of the world, they're now looking at AI native services. They actually want to disrupt swathes of industries or archaic industries altogether by using AI to do the functions that humans would have normally done. We don't quite believe in that or prescribe to that philosophy. We still want to just help people and improve their capability. But what we're seeing a lot of investment go into, we have a company Sel and I both know well in America that do insurance underwriting. And they have a super large contract with one of the biggest insurance companies in the world who have just replaced their whole back office. We're seeing that sort of step change in, what, AI companies should come for the whole thing. Look at Corgi Insurance, for example. They want to be the biggest insurance company in the world, but it's all ran by AI. So we're seeing it move from, SaaS software that kind of helped you to now, can AI just replace whole legacy industries? And that's going to be interesting to see, especially in credit and collections, who are the companies that are going to become truly AI native.
And how much of that is in terms of, so you've got a lot of companies that've got a lot of legacy processes, legacy systems. I mean, they were designed the way they were to optimize for cost to a large extent. I mean, do you think they're going to be able to change, or do you think we're going to see a wave of people who are basically like new startups who've completely rethought the whole process because they don't have any of that technical debt, essentially?
So I think they'll be forced to change. Whether they can change, I don't know, because if you're looking at credit and collections,
they're willing to change as well.
Willing. I think some of the capital coming into this world, and which Sel and I know really well. We speak to these kind of investors every day. It's going to be harder for maybe mid-tier, smaller companies to survive. I think the larger DCAs, collections teams of the world will always be there, and they can buy and they can build quickly. But I would advocate for those that are not doing it to really get on it now.
And so what's the strategy? That's going to be your next question.
Yeah.
Is it around experimenting on the edges? Is it about going sort of like full force into it? Is it about sort of like just trying stuff out, getting to know it? And what do you think? What's your recommendation strategy?
It's trying stuff out and getting to know. From our perspective, what we see works the best is a pilot it, segment some of your book off, see if it works there, see what you like, see what you don't like, see where it can change. And if you think you can implement this into your workflow, then do so. We always believe that you need to see how it works. You need to try it out before you just invest into it, because it's an investment at the end of the day, and you're trying to see if it's going to work for you or not.
Obviously you'd have quite a good view around what a big opportunity there potentially is in terms of like starting to scope some of that stuff out. And the reception you're kind of getting from people, as I say, I mean, you mentioned like that's kind of like changing. I mean, what's your view on what the future is going to look like in terms of where you think it's going to be adopted? I suppose how it's going to change over time. Because even if we were to have this conversation 6 months ago, I think we probably would have had slightly different answers than we probably had today, because it just feels like it's moving so quickly.
Yeah, really true.
Yeah.
I think it's what we mentioned before about AI becoming an employee within businesses rather than a software that people use to help with things. So it will be an employee that you ask to do different jobs. This month, I want you to go out and I want you to focus on this. Next month, I want you to focus on something else, where you could actually give jobs to someone that you'd hire. I think AI will get to a point where it understands the context of your whole business from the ground up so well that you can actually have it doing completely different jobs within the business at the highest level.
Yeah. And so in terms of like, actually, I mean, the other thing we haven't really talked about, I suppose, is using AI to help build the tools as well, right? So obviously there's been a lot of talk around like Claude co-work or etc. Claude Code around actually using that to kind of build the tools. I mean, how much of a game changer is it in terms of being able to do that to develop some of these tools as well? And then how do you then start to think about quality auditing some of that?
So we're AI native. We've got our tech co-founder JP, who doesn't want to hire an engineer over the next 2 quarters just because he doesn't need it. He just wants more credits. That's where most of our money is going. For us as a GTM, because Selom and I do the GTM, we have nifty little tools we're building in Lovable to help us run our GTM. So we have we're bringing out data from companies' house. We know who is in debt in the UK just by like external data, and we can use that to drive our GTM. So I don't think we could have started this company 18 months ago in a weird kind of way. That's how much AI has moved on. It's allowed 3 guys to effectively run a company, which if I was to do this 6 years ago, may have required 10 people. It's quite insane how it's moved on.
Well, I think it's interesting because you guys are really smart in terms of like the way you're doing it, and it's kind of like it's the capability that's available there. I just kind of feel that it's not necessarily widely known in terms of like the ability to be able to do it. And if you are AI native, the speed at which you can move is just terrific. I kind of interested. I mean, we were chatting a little bit, say, about OpenClaw and sort of co-work and where that's going to. It feels like that's almost like another kick that's going to happen in terms of like being able to almost like hand it off to employees, which is kind of, I suppose, what you're doing from a collections point of view. But it feels like it's going to accelerate again. I don't know what you kind of feel on that. And I suppose it's kind of like hanging on for the ride as much as anything. At least from my point of view, you're a bit more savvy than me, but just trying to hang on to stay on as long as you possibly can, just to keep up with it and being flexible so you can talk about it. It seems like it's kind of important.
Yeah, I think the way it's going, I think it's only going to get easier to use as well. Those things like OpenClaw right now, I think it's quite difficult for the average person to use. I use it, but I went through hell trying to get that set up for certain things in my life. But I think once that becomes
easier, right? Co-work's way easier.
Co-work's way easier, but I would say it's still a small percentage of people that really know the true capabilities of that. I think the average person we speak to in the collections industry would not be using co-work or OpenClaw. I think once that becomes readily accessible and people start to know about that at mass, it's going to be insane. The amount of services that people build around it will be terrific, I think.
I'm maybe I'm just showing my age, but I remember in the early days of HTML, right? So it was, and I'm going to make me feel very old now. The early days of the .com, and then we could all write HTML, right? And this was before you got into like CSS, like scripts and sort of JavaScript and all the kind of stuff that's developed since. But in the early days, it was accessible to everyone, and it was just like if you kept up with it, you would have been. It would have been fantastic. And the same with early game development, right? So back in the early days of programming, we could all do it at the very start, but you had to invest and keep up with it. And if you kept up with it, you could create some amazing things. However, if you didn't keep up with it, you sort of just like very quickly fell behind. And it feels like that's the same now, which is, if the younger folks have got a great opportunity just to stay ahead with it and sort of shape it and craft it into something new, and it's important for everyone else just to make sure that we're, say, keeping up to date. Really, I think it feels
definitely just staying educated. I think it's super important.
Yeah.
Super.
Yeah.
So next 5 years, where do you think it's going to be? What's your vision for the next 5 years?
I think every single company on the planet will have some sort of AI employee working for them full time. I think in credit collections particularly, everyone will have a AI employee working for them.
Selom, what do you think?
Exact same as Ade. I don't necessarily think everyone will have it. They'll be using it the same way, even within the same sectors. I think within collections, for example, some people will be using it for their data ingestment, enrichment, their account reconciliation. Other might be doing all of their outbound through AI. But there will be an employee in each company, and they'll be using it
Yeah.
how they deem fit.
But it seems like the paradigm shift, certainly what you're explaining, is thinking of it as an employee, putting it, overlaying it on like easily on an easy work list as an example to do certain types, and then you can obviously then expand or contract from there,
Yeah.
adding in extra work types. But it's around having that almost like augmented resource, almost like for use cases depending on what you want to design, right?
Yeah, and it's just really understanding the context of your whole business. Imagine an employee that you have that understands every single case that's ever gone through it, every case that your company's ever dealt with, any problem you've ever had, anything, all of your plans going forward. Imagine one employee having all of that information and be able to act upon that. I think that's where we're really going to see that value added.
Yeah. Well, it's fantastic, and I really appreciate making the time to chat to me. And I know when we were talking through the product, I was impressed with just like the ambition you guys have got, and sort of like where you're currently sort of like developing it as well. So I mean, I loved it. It was super interesting. So really appreciate making the time.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having us.
Thanks
Really
for having us.
really enjoyed it.